the Future Kings group calling from? Pittsburgh.
Hey, my bad.
From Pittsburgh.
Pittsburgh, yes. I saw the sweatshirt.
Yeah. Where are you from?
I am calling from DC,
Oh, cool.
Washington, D.C., yeah, but I am from Bangladesh.
That's really
So a little farther, Pittsburgh.
How long have you been in DC?
4 months.
Wow.
About 4 months, yeah. But I went to the University of Virginia, so was in Charlottesville for a while. It's a good time. Pretty cold. Definitely colder than I expected.
I think Pittsburgh's colder.
I know, man. That's why I respect you guys. I don't know.
Send help.
Yeah. Crazy. I have a lot of friends who went to school in Canada. It's yeah. I think about how lucky I am every day for that. So it's good.
All right. So let's start. I'm going to record it and we'll post this so if other people are able to join. So let me start. I'll start. Do you want to go to the next slide there, Shafat, real quick?
Yes.
Cool. So really quick, I just wanted to welcome everyone. Thank you all for joining us. This is our first webinar this year with the T-Mobile Changemaker Challenge. It's open. This was open to anyone that applied to the competition, really focusing in on those new and early stage ideas to really help take it to the next step. So just to frame that throughout as to where we're coming from and where we're starting at. We all know you have ideas, so we're starting at a point where you're here, you have a great idea. Some of you are doing some things to make it happen. Some of you are further along, but this is really to get from idea to the next step. We're going to talk a lot about prototyping. I'm really excited to have you all here. The T-Mobile Changemaker Challenge is a great partnership between T-Mobile and Ashoka. So T-Mobile does a lot to help outreach and get people on board and invests and is such a great partner. And then Ashoka, we created the field of social entrepreneurship almost 40 years ago. And our whole world is connecting people around the world who have great ideas and helping support change makers. And our vision here at Ashoka is to really support all of you as you take your ideas as far as you want to or can dream of. So I'm excited. We have my colleague Shafat right there. He's in DC. And myself, we're the two Ashoka team. And then we have Addie, one of our amazing winners from last year, who's also here to talk a little bit about her journey and her change-making lessons learned and advice she would share. And we'd also love to just make this very interactive. So if you have questions, please put them in the chat box. If you have something to add, we'd love to hear it. So if you have a lesson or something when we're talking about the different processes and steps that you learned or had an aha moment or got stuck, we'd love to hear that too. So please jump on in. And at the end, we're going to do some breakout groups. So you'll get a chance to kind of meet other people and chat a little bit more. So I will, with that, kick it off to you, Shafat, to take on the first part. If you have questions, feel free to chat them. I'll be manning that and can jump in as we meet. And otherwise, if you all could just mute your lines just to start so there's no background noise, and then we'll unmute them as we go. Okay, over to you, Shafat.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Rachel. I appreciate it. I love the energies that we have so far. I think I joined the Zoom call 10 minutes before just to see if everything was going to go right, and already saw 2 people, both from Florida, and it was very, very amazing. Just to kind of kick things off, I wanted to briefly share how we want to structure this. So we just went through introductions. Like Rachel mentioned, we both work at Ashoka. For me, it's a dream and a pleasure to be in the organization which created the field of social entrepreneurship, and How can we, from our experiences, help you as change makers to proceed in your journey? The second part of our session really is to talk about how can we take steps. You have amazing ideas with your brilliant minds, but what are the kind of steps that can nudge you in the right direction, or maybe bring you back a little bit to start from scratch? And then lastly, we're going to talk about how can you bring your idea, which is in your mind, to life? How can you take actionable steps that will essentially result in whatever you want it to result to? So yeah, firstly, so we already went through this, but I just thought it'd be cool to share some really cool pictures of us. But moving forward, the first concept that I wanted to touch on is this concept or buzzword, if you will, called design thinking. So what is design thinking? It's a human-centered approach to problem solving and innovation. Now, the key here is that it's really looking at solving a particular problem through an innovation. And the beauty of design thinking is that it touches the people that you're trying to solve the problem for. So basically, it's a 5-step process to come up with meaningful ideas that solve real problems for a particular group of people. Do you guys see the green lines as well? Is that just me? Never mind. Sorry, I don't know what that is. Definitely not me. Yeah, I don't know. But yeah, so what are the steps that this 5-step process has, and how do you kind of move forward with this concept of design thinking, right? So the first step is to empathize, right? You want to conduct interviews with the people that really care about the problem that you're trying to solve. Now, this part is so crucial, because if you're trying to solve a particular problem that you might face, if you're trying to move forward with the process of creating a venture project idea, it's important that you recognize that other people face this problem as well. Really diving deep into the root cause is the first step here. The second step is, after you kind of conduct these interviews, define the problem. So how can you, in one statement, or let's say a couple words, maybe 2 sentences max, define exactly what the problem you're trying to solve is after you interview the people that care about this problem or are facing this problem. The third step here is putting your brilliant minds into work. Ideate. Now focus only on the problem statement. This is really, really important. If you have one statement, focus on that and produce ideas, multiple ideas. Let's say you have 100 ideas. You have an idea book even to solve that particular problem. The fourth step is prototyping. Now, after you've kind of dug into the interviews, put your minds to work, how can you connect the dots and maybe sketch up a final solution and build what we refer to as a minimum viable product, which is the kind of simplest solution to the big problem that you're trying to solve. Just good enough to be tested, and then simply test it. Now, you want to test it with actual users. And when you do, the important aspect here is to not defend your idea. It's really, I think, confirmation bias, or kind of realizing the fact that maybe my idea is wrong, and being that self-aware is very crucial here. And you want to make sure that you're testing it with as many people as possible and getting any feedback. Any feedback is great here. And then you iterate. So after you've tested it, you learn from it, iterate, and then you launch. And you repeat this process until you have a final prototype or a product that really solves that root problem, and you're ready to change the world. But this workshop, it's particularly focusing on prototype. So how can you do something actionable in a simple way that could solve the problem that you care about? So prototyping, right? How can you take that out? Now, there's two ways entrepreneurs tend to go about doing their work. Some people start with an idea, and through prototyping, they find that bigger vision. Others have a big vision and prototype simple steps to build to that bigger vision. So let's take Julia, for instance. Now, Julia wants to bake a wedding cake for her friend's wedding. This is her big venture. Her friend is getting married, and she's never baked a cake, by the way. She's not a baker, but
Try to turn the alarm off, Corey.
she really wants to do this. If everyone can mute, that would be great. Simply the microphone icon. But yes, so she wants to bake a wedding cake for her friend's wedding. For context, I love cake. I have a box of cookies here. I am essentially a little bit addicted to dessert, but we're not going to talk about that today. But the main issue here is, how can Julia think about her idea and turn it into that wedding cake? But the challenge with wedding cakes is that it can be expensive. Try going to a shop and buying a wedding cake. It'd be expensive, and if you're making it, there's a lot of time that you have to put into it, especially if you don't know how to bake, right? And what can she do before making this giant wedding cake with maybe a heart on top that could help her kind of go towards this big vision? Is there anything she can do before? Well, maybe she could make a birthday cake when she maybe wants to surprise her friend at her wedding. But if she shows up to the wedding with a giant wedding cake that's probably not well baked, think about how that could turn out. So can she make a small birthday cake and just kind of ask her friend, hey, do you like this cake? What do you think? What do you like about it? What do you not like about it? Is this your favorite flavor? Do you even like chocolate? I don't know. But even making a birthday cake can be expensive. Trust me, I've tried, I've failed. I'm not too proud about saying that, but it is how it is. And it's expensive. It still takes time, and it still is something that might be a little too big for her particular skill set. So maybe she can make a cupcake. That's not too hard to do, less time, less resources, but still she can go to her friend and say, hey, I just made this cupcake. What do you think? Do you like this flavor? And maybe she likes it, but maybe she doesn't. Maybe she says, oh, actually, I hate strawberries. She might be weird if she says, I hate strawberries, but she might. You never know. And that's the person she is creating this project for. So even before that cupcake comes the ingredients, and the simplest solution that Julia might use is to go to her friend and say, hey, I just found this set of ingredients. Let's say Gordon Ramsay baked something. Do you like this? Do you think this is something you want? And maybe her friend says, actually, I'm lactose intolerant. So that simple statement saves her from going through all of those troubles. Or she says, I love this. Can you do this for me? And that in itself could be the simple solution again. So we talked about how Julia could start by making a cake, a birthday cake, but maybe she could start with ingredients. Maybe she could explore different ingredients and say, oh, I have this ingredients for a cupcake, or I have a set of ingredients that I found for cookies. And she takes both of those options to her friend, and her friend says, oh, by the way, I actually love cookies, and I always dreamed of having a cookie cake for my wedding. So just to give you some, I guess, context as to why it's important and why this process can lead to saving a bunch of resources, including time. And the key here is that as you're going through these steps, you want to make sure that you're adding something to it. You're taking another actionable step. How can you do whatever you have and then make it better, right? So let's take another example. Let's say this is Zach. Zach wants to, he's he's very spiritual. And he's really interested in learning about different faiths in his school. And Zach loves basketball, big LeBron fan. And he essentially wants to organize a basketball tournament to learn about different faiths in his school. He has it completely planned out. He knows exactly who he wants to invite. He knows exactly the logistics behind it, but Zach is confused. He's in the mindset where he's thinking about it and he's like, well, what's the first step? How do I even bring this to life? How do I take the first action? And what Zach came up with was, well, can we create a flyer and pass it along? And it's a simple flyer which talks about the event, except he didn't already spend his time and resources organizing the event. He didn't spend his time and resources gathering other people, inviting other people, but simply made this flyer to get feedback. And the important word here is feedback. When people saw his flyer, he says, oh, well, let's say the snacks and drinks weren't provided and people weren't too happy about that. Well, now he knows that's something he could add on his flyer or in his event. So again, to reiterate this process, it's really about building, testing, learning, and then rebuilding. And as you're going through this, you build bigger circles. And again, sophistication. You want to make bigger, better circles. And maybe at the third circle, you realize, well, this might not actually solve the problem. Well, you can go back to step one and then build again, test again, learn again, and then do the same process.
Yeah, and I think I would also just add to that the whole point of prototyping is that first step, and it can be messy and you don't have to necessarily know your end point. It can be that journey in between. And I think, and we'll hear from Addie in a little bit where she'll talk a little bit about her project, but if you hear any business entrepreneur, they didn't just start with Netflix. Like Netflix wasn't just a overnight thing, right? It took iterations, and they talk a little bit about how they started with a really small market just in San Francisco, and then they grew, right? So it's, what are those first prototypes that you can try out? The first thing that Netflix did was they weren't even sure if you could mail CD. Their first Netflix, they literally would send you DVDs and then you could watch a DVD and return it. And there was no end time to return it. Really unique, new. Their first prototype, literally, they just went to see if they could mail a CD through the mail. Like they didn't even know if you could do that. So they literally went to the post office and they mailed themselves a DVD. So that was their first prototype. I think just thinking through, like, you don't have to have the end wedding cake in mind. You could just have that beginning idea and figure out what that wedding cake is. Or you could have that wedding cake and those steps in between are figuring out how to get to that big wedding cake. Well, I'll hand it back. Sorry, Shafat, I just wanted to jump in.
No, that's so crucial. And I think that's such a good point as to how, and we'll hear from Addie from her experience, but there's a lot of business and social entrepreneurs iterate. And I think iteration is such a key concept that doesn't get spoken about a lot, because you hear about the kind of spotlighted stories, the big picture, oh, this is how we became successful, but you don't hear about all those small little details that went into building that bigger picture. So thank you, Rachel, for kind of adding that. And I want you guys to really think about what stage you are in as we're talking to Addie right now. And Addie's still here. That's amazing. Um, but essentially, as we're talking to her, I want you to envision in your mind, what stage are you in? And let's take that wedding cake analogy. Are you in the ingredients phase? Are you cupcake? Are you a birthday cake? Or I don't think you're really at the wedding cake, but any step that you're at, and kind of learning from Addie and her experiences to see how you can apply to your own venture. So Addie, if you're ready, I would love to learn from you.
Sure thing. So should I just sort of start walk through the project grassroots
Yeah,
up?
so I would love to kind of firstly ask you to, if you could introduce yourself a little
Sure
bit, and introduce your change-making journey and the amazing work that you've been doing. I think I would personally be interested, but I think everybody would be very interested in learning about that.
Sure. So my name is Addie Battle. I live in Michigan. So Michigan is shaped like a hand. I live in the thumb. We're very rural, so there's about our population in the town I'm closest to is about 3,000 people. And meeting the need for our village is what we call it. It's MEATING. And meeting the need for our village began as a hunger relief project when we volunteered at our local food pantry and noticed that the sources of protein available to low-income members of our community were canned and processed things like cans of beans, cans of tuna, jars of peanut butter. And our food pantry tries to do and does a really good job meeting all of the My Plate requirements, getting all of the food groups included in what they're able to give out, but they just didn't have the resources for the high quality protein, beef and pork and chicken and the things that were on my dinner table. And I was about 12 years old when I first volunteered at, it's called Revive Ministries in Cass City. And I was packing in, cans of tuna thinking, how would I like to have this for every single dinner that's available to me? So that's when I and my three friends and I who started the project realized that, we grow up in an agricultural community. We have skills as farm kids. We have barns to raise animals in. We have a skill that we can use to help make an impact in our community and try to bring the sources of protein to our community that are on our dinner tables at home. So that's where the idea sparked. And as we're talking about prototypes, our first prototype was really just 50 chickens in the barn. And that's where we learned at a time when, we didn't even know what a $100 bill looked like. I wrote for and earned a $2,500 grant to start doing this. And so that's where we gained a lot of community support from our FFA and 4-H leaders, actually, and our parents, of course, in what does it look like to raise 50 chickens? And we had to make sure that all of the processors were licensed in the correct way. So it was a lot of learning through that. But when we began, we definitely didn't expect for it to grow as much as it has. We've had a $63,000 impact in our community. That's through 10,000 pounds of meat, 2,000 gallons of milk, 200 blocks of cheese, 350 dozen eggs, and 350 pounds of produce. So we're and we're now applying for 501c3 nonprofit status. So that's where we are now. And I wouldn't even say we're to wedding cake stage yet, because we're looking at, I'm a senior in high school, so I'm looking at moving off to college, and that looks like providing for a lot of sustainability of the organization. So we're handing it over to our younger siblings, actually. And as we apply for 501c3 status, we're also building some organizational structure. We now finally have a solidified board of directors, and that I'm a member of, and we're still growing. Does that answer all of the initial questions?
I love that. I also would love to point out, one of the things I love that you just said, Addie, is you had all that impact and you're just now applying for 501c3. I think a lot of times we feel like 501c3 is the first step and we can't create change without that. And I would challenge that assumption and say that you don't need to be a nonprofit to be creating change in your community. And I would actually say having prototypes gets you further along and gets you funding and gets you able to have a 501c3 organization.
Yes.
So I think that's super powerful. You have all this impact and now you're going into that journey.
Thank you. And that is probably my number one piece of advice is, as we talk about those prototypes, reaching out to community supporters with very tangible asks. That's the first thing we learned. We started with that first $2,500 with the grant I received, but that was enough for a couple batches of chickens. And from there, we had to ask our community for more support. And we found that if all it takes is reaching out, but reaching out with very tangible asks. We had things like, $200 will get us this far, $1,000 will get us this far, and we were actually able to raise $8,000 additional dollars in that first year. So doing something with small amounts of money, having those small prototypes that community supporters can see and see you doing good things with, helps get further support in the future.
Oh my God, that's so cool. Sorry. But just to, I guess, reiterate the importance of taking small steps,
Yes.
right? You said what, 66,000? I couldn't remember the impact.
63. Yep.
Yeah, that didn't happen overnight. So I guess one of my biggest questions would be, what were some of the roadblocks that you saw along the way? And did you iterate, and like, how did you iterate, as well as, did you ever think about quitting? Did you ever think about the fact that, oh my God, I'm so young, I could be doing so many other things, but you still continued to make the impact?
I would say that personally, I've never felt the need to quit, because I have had a lot of guidance in that taking it one step at a time, that biting off only small chunks, only what you can chew at one time. So we very first started, the very first roadblock was that we were all 12 years old. So this was back in 2014. We were all 12 years old. We couldn't, of course, drive. We didn't have any money of our own. So we had to get, our parents' money and our parents' cars for literally everything. So we saw raising animals and donating them to the food pantry as something that we could do mostly from home, something that our parents had lots of resources to help us with because it's part of our livelihood. And so that was our first roadblock, is that we were super young. We didn't have a lot of our own resources and what fit with what our parents were able to do for us. And then also personally, my family adopted two of my youngest brothers through foster care, and around 2014 was when their challenges were the most difficult. So that meant not a lot of leaving home to volunteer at the food pantry itself. We had to stay home and provide them that base from home. So we couldn't do a lot of traveling. So that was probably the number one roadblock, was finding a way to make the impact that we saw from home using the resources we had. And then more recently, probably our biggest challenge has been, I alluded to a little bit, that building sustainability as me and the other co-founders look at moving off to college. We sat down with actually some extension educators in our area and said, okay, we're leaving in a year. We're scared. We were very scared that meeting the need for our village was going to absolutely fall apart without us. And they said, you know what? I think you have a wonderful community. And we said, yes, we do, but how do we use that? So they helped us through creating what we called the Cass City Hunger Summit. And that brought together the community to really explore what the challenges are. And we discovered that, not having a grocery store is our number one challenge. And we knew that, but to know that our community was also very centered around getting a grocery store to Cass City. And that's not something I mentioned earlier. We're a food desert, which means we don't have a grocery store for 20 miles around us. And they were also the community was also very rallied around getting a community garden. So for meeting the need for our village, to know that, okay, those are the things that we're going to find the most community support in. That's where we should go if we want to find further community support. And then those educators who we asked for help from also sat us down and said, okay, now who are the youth? Because that's been another common thread in the project, is having that youth empowerment piece. And so they sat down with us and said, okay, how can we get other youth involved? So having that's a recommendation I would have for all of you building your own projects is find those ways to get support, sit down with people who understand what you're doing and where you're trying to go and see what they think the biggest needs are, and be very authentic with them about what your fears are, because that was one of our biggest motivators for gaining 501c3 status, is that we were scared of it falling apart. What your fears are, what you think the needs are, and they will help you to find support around people who share those fears and those needs.
So just echoing off of that, what would you say was your biggest fear when you just started?
I think we were pretty young and naive. So probably our biggest fear would have been not doing anything. I think we saw that there wasn't a high quality source of protein, so our only fear was not doing anything about it. We didn't know what it would look like, but we knew that we had to do something.
I just want to echo, I love that you said we didn't know what we were going to do about it, but we knew we needed to do something. I think there's also this misconception that you have to have a perfect plan and a business plan and everything needs to be in place before you take that first step. And I would say we see over and over, we talk to social entrepreneurs and Ashoka fellows and people in the field that are doing this day in, day out. And all of them just took that step. They took something, they did something, they ripped the Band-Aid off. And then as they did it, it helped them turn into what their bigger vision was. And it might've changed. But like sitting down at a computer and writing a plan is not going to get you the impact and the change that you need. Not to say planning isn't wonderful and you should sit down and brainstorm and come up with something, but there needs to be action tied to that.
It takes both, absolutely.
Yeah, and I love that you said that.
And I guess my last dying question is, because we're in the prototyping conversation, I think you mentioned this a little bit, but if you could flesh it out a little bit more about what was the first step that you took when you, like you said, you saw tuna cans and you weren't okay with that. So what did you do right after that? That's the first. And the second would be, who did you talk to? To figure out, okay, is this actually, like, are other people feeling the same way I'm feeling?
So the very first step after the four of us volunteered at the food pantry and said this isn't right was we were all actually also charter members of our local FFA chapter. It was the first time in 10 years that there had been a junior high FFA chapter. So we were kind of, the administration said, I don't know, what do you guys want to do? Find something. And so we said, okay. So we applied for that $25,000 grant. It's called a Living to Serve grant. I don't know if any of you have FFA chapters available, but Living to Serve grants are the best. Lots of funding available there. And so we basically just said, you know what, we're new members. We want to do something with our time. We didn't much care what it was beyond the fact that it had to address this protein problem. And so we applied for the grant that basically the description was, here's some money to do something in your community as long as you tell us how important it is to you. And so we sat down and we applied for that grant. And then when we received that, it required for us to do some research in our community, which was really, really good. Absolutely have research on the actual problem in your community. And we found that 17% of the county was food insecure. And so that's when it really solidified for us. Here's what you need to do. So once we had that money in our pockets, we had already support from our 4-H club leaders, our parents, and our FFA advisor. But once we had that, us group of kids and also our adult advisors said, you know what, okay, we need more help with this. So we reached out to meat quality extension educators, and they helped us. One aspect of the grant was an educational component in your community. So they helped us to, it's really cringy now because we were 12, but we did a whole video about how to cook meat properly. So that was one of our first supporters. And then we had to reach out to the local food pantry and say, okay, we have this protein available. We've noticed that it's probably a need, but do you think it's really a need? Are you willing to accept that? And so those were some of our very first steps.
That's amazing. And I just want to ask you, I guess, you said you had a lot of supporters, like advisors, parents. What were those conversations like? Like, what did you tell them that you were, did you sell them on an idea? Did you sell them on yourself? What was that conversation?
I think for our parents, it was pretty easy. They said, you guys are young, and so I'm also homeschooled, and as were all three of my friends that helped me start this. So our parents are particularly dedicated to our our educational development, social emotional development. So they saw the good in doing something for our communities. So that was pretty easy. That was more like, hey mom, I want to donate meat to the food pantry. And she said, okay, we're going to figure out how to do that then. But then some of our other 4-H and FFA supporters, it was, hey, we have this thing. We do have $2,500 to work with in case we need to reimburse gas mileage. That was a big conversation, because where we live in rural America, it's a million hours to drive anywhere. So to say that we did have some funding to reimburse them help if need be, and to say, okay, we don't know what we're doing, but we need to have an educational component. Can you help us with what needs to be taught about getting food to a food pantry? And they said, well, one thing a lot of low-income people struggle to find resources with is how to cook meat once they have it. And we said, oh, we can do that. We can teach them how to cook meat. And then they said, you know what, a lot of low-income people don't always have the supplies to cook meat properly. And we said, okay, well, then we got some thermometers donated from the American Pork Board, got some roasting pans donated, and we did think about ovens, because that is something you need to cook meat, but that wasn't something we had resources to donate, of course. So having those conversations, here's what we want to do. Is this really fulfilling a need you see? What else can we do? What can we teach about? Were some of our most important questions.
Yeah, and that's so crucial. I just want to emphasize the fact that they saw problems along the way and met them. But I know there's a lot of questions.
Yeah, so let me
I see that.
go through. There's a whole bunch for you, Addie. So
okay.
First question, great question. The Future Kings group in Pittsburgh were asking, how did you apply for grant money without being a 501c3?
That is difficult. So actually, our 4-H club, Michigan State University Extension, has 501c3 status, and by extension of that, our 4-H club has 501c3 status. So we have been able to find, I don't want to say a loophole, but an extra place to get that support. It is hard to get grant money without being a 501c3. One recommendation is to reach out to local service clubs. That was where our first $8,000 came from, was just, so Rotary and Gavel Club are the service clubs in our area. And they're usually always willing to, especially when they see young faces, they think that we can't do anything wrong. So they're really motivated to help us, especially if you have very tangible asks. If you give them amounts, $200 could help us do this. $1,000 could help us do this. Whatever seems appropriate to ask them for. Tangible asks to service clubs are a great place to start for us.
Yeah, I second that. And I would say you can also find fiscal sponsorship. A lot of nonprofits in your community will be your fiscal sponsor, where they can be your 501c3 and they'll take the money and help distribute it. So things to look at. So someone asked, do you sometimes in the middle of your project doubt your whole idea? He said, sometimes I do. I think that self-doubt's real. Can you talk to us a little bit about that self-doubt and wondering kind of if you're on the right track or you feel like you're doing what you set out to do?
Absolutely. And that's where I'd go back to that idea of being really authentic with your community supporters. If you are feeling scared about what you're doing, say that. Say, I'm not sure about this. How can I, what do you think? How can I improve? Is this really fulfilling a need? And just reach out to people and ask, because chances are, if it is a problem, then they've also been thinking about the same thing, and they'll be relieved that you're ready to have a conversation about it. And if it's not a problem, then you'll find that reassurance.
Good. Good answer. Okay, so the next one is, what's your day-to-day look like balancing school and your organization?
That's a good question. It's a mess. No, it's okay. I've been really blessed that I'm homeschooled and that my mom is very dedicated to the fact that running a nonprofit is school sometimes. Sometimes, you know, I spend 8 hours in a day on the phone with the attorney, making meat deliveries, picking up the milk, dropping off milk crates, and that's okay. So I've been really blessed that I have that flexibility, but I am a senior. I am looking to get into Michigan State University, so I do need to have the academics under my belt too. So for me, it looks like a lot of time management tools, because time management is not my forte. So I use like my iPhone calendar. I use Evernote as a note-taking app. I use Trello to keep lists of things I need to do. Time management is absolutely key, and because I'm not good at it, I ask my mom for a lot of support. I ask my co-founder Pearl. She is impeccably organized, so I ask her for a lot of support when it comes to things that need to be organized with meeting the need for our village. Use your time management skills, and if that's not your forte, get help, because it's important.
Yeah, good advice. I would say the whole point of having co-founders or teammates is that they can kind of fill holes that maybe your strengths. And so really lean on your team, because just because you're not good at it doesn't mean someone on your team isn't. So
Right.
Find people that complement you. This is a really great question. So says, I'm from a student-powered organization in Ohio, and just like Addie, we are worried about the constant turnover of students and employees. How do you address the turnover? Well, we know the importance of investing and empowering students. It can seem daunting to pour resources into students that will graduate in 4 years. We also have a strong community connections, but are struggling with the navigation.
Excuse me, sorry, 1 second. I have to plug in before my computer dies.
Yeah.
So youth are really hard to work with, because we're being pulled in more directions than ever before. You know, sports want a chunk of us, academics want a chunk of us, our church, you know, if sometimes wants a chunk of us, everything wants a piece of our time. And that's where personally your own time management also comes in. But if you're looking to recruit youth, some suggestions I have are really write up what your mission and your vision is, what you hope to accomplish, and find youth who are also very passionate about that. Because if they feel strongly about what you're trying to do, chances are they will find ways to manage their time to help you do that.
Good answer. This is a great question, and I'm Andrea asked, should we look for a fiscal sponsor early on, especially if you're not a C3 and not planning to at the moment? So you found a sponsor with your school group right away, and they managed your funds and they were your fiscal sponsor. I would also note though that you don't always, so if it's a grant making, typically you have to have a 501c3. There are ways to get money. Companies don't have, it doesn't have to be a 501c3 for, say, your local grocery store to give you money or to give a donation. Sometimes they will just give it to your school group. And if you're in school, both college or high school, I would also look at your schools, because a lot of times your school can be that for you. They can start a club, manage your money aspect. Colleges are great for this. You can start student clubs, student chapters, and they will do all that for you. So check out resources that your schools have to add. Brandon wants to know, so when you start you go off to college and you're going to get nonprofit, where do you plan to take it in the future after college? So what are your dreams? You go off to college, then what?
I guess super long-term future, my dream would be to manage meeting the need for our village as a nonprofit and receive my income that way. That to me seems pretty far in the future, so I don't know if it's possible. I'll find out hopefully soon. That would be absolutely my dream, but if that doesn't happen, I feel very confident that we can continue to have the youth board and board of directors as we have it set up now, even though that will look like a lot of turnover on the youth side and frankly a lot of turnover on the adult side also. I do feel confident that meeting the need for our village can continue. So I think the thing that's helped me be confident in that way is having a strong organizational structure with clear it doesn't have to be through parliamentary procedure type offices, but that's what's worked for us. But through clearly defined roles and expectations, we'll keep it going. I hope. I guess I have yet to find out.
I like it. And Jack, do you have 501c3 status yet, or you're applying currently?
Oh, me. Sorry.
Yeah, sorry.
We're applying currently. I was on the phone with the attorney yesterday.
Cool. And it seems to be from all of the change makers I've been talking with, a lot of people are asking about 501c3 status and how to do it in the process. So we'll definitely host a webinar in the future that can help navigate the system. And how much did it cost? Do you know how much it costs in Michigan? It's different in each state.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
We haven't gotten to that point yet. I think it's somewhere between $200 and $400 for us.
Yeah. I think it's based on each state, so it's very different. And a lot of times you can find lawyers that will help you out pro bono and help you navigate the system. So we'll definitely have a chat. We can talk more about the 501c3. It seems to be a big question and support, so we'd love to talk about that. So I'll pass it back to you, Shafat, and if you guys have questions for Addie or for Shafat or for myself too, you can keep chatting and we'll jump in. It looks like we only have about 10 minutes left, Shafat.
Yeah, so oh my God, thank you so much first, Addie. Oh, this was so helpful for me too. I think I'm so inspired by your journey and how you're continuing to change the world and how you want to see it. And I would just encourage people to kind of draw from little stories that she's said and think about how can you apply that in your own venture. As for the future, I think the important part for this webinar is what we've constantly talked about is prototyping, right? So let's go back to step one. Step one is, again, prototype whatever you have. Find the simplest solution to the big problem and test it. After you test it, iterate, because I'm going to assume you're going to learn some things that won't go as well. And if it goes brilliantly, well, congratulations. And then iterate and then launch again. And do that process continually. I think that's the most important part from what we've learned from Addie, as well as from our fellows, as well as every single person as Ashoka that we've come across, is the fact that that first step might not be the final step, but it's so important to where you want to go. So keep taking those steps, and I'm sure you'll end up exactly where you want to be. Thank you so much for joining us. Rachel, I'll kind of let you close, but just for everyone's minds as well as calendars, we have another webinar on the 14th, the same time, and it's about recruiting others to join your initiative. Addie just spoke about the importance of it, and especially for you guys being young change makers, it's hard to balance something so big by yourself. So how can you invite other people to join your initiative as well?
Yeah. And we wanted to do breakouts, so we'd love a chance for you guys to be able to connect with other people on the call if you're interested. So we can do our closeout now, and we'll do a quick breakout if you guys are interested. And on the breakout, we'd love for you guys to share a quick update of like who, what your project is, who you are, like what you're doing in like 2 sentences, really quick, like what problem are you solving, and then what stage you're at. So if you were talking about this recipe, cupcake, birthday cake, wedding cake analogy, like which of those are you? And what you see as, after thinking a little bit, like what would be your next step? What would be that first prototype or that next prototype for you to take it next step? How does Does that sound good to everyone? So I'm going to break you out into groups if you're interested. You don't have to. You can hop off now if you want.
And if you're comfortable, I would turn on your video, show your beautiful face.
Yeah, it's a chance to get to meet other people, share your
Yeah.
story. I'll break you into breakout groups, and then we'll bring you guys back when you're done. We can close it out, but love to hear your stories. But if not, if this isn't for you and you don't want to do it, no pressure. Feel free to hop off. It's a great time to step out. And hopefully we'll see you for our next webinar, January 14th. Stay tuned for more info on other webinars as they come. And with that, I'm going to send you all to breakouts. Give me 2 seconds to do this.
I'm excited to see who I land up with.
Okay, let's see. Okay. Ready? Go. Hey guys.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi. How did it go?
It went really well.
Yeah,
Yeah,
good
what-
chats.
Yep,
Yeah.
yep.
We've got 2 breakouts that haven't broken up yet.
Ooh.
Okay, awesome.
20 seconds and they'll be kicked out of their breakout rooms. Did you guys have good discussions?
Yes, we did. We did.
Yeah.
They popped out way too quickly. So we got to like the cupcake question and then we were like done.
Yeah.
The cupcake? Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool.
So are you gonna be there in the headquarters during like the 19th through the 21st?
I will, and we'll talk about that in a different time because this is open to all entrants. So we'll talk a little bit about more details for those that were selected in the new year. So stay tuned after we all come back from break. Everyone good? Did everyone have good discussions? Did it
Yeah.
help you to maybe
shared
hear what other people are
Instagram.
doing and where they're at? Yeah, I also think it's helpful that like you're not alone. You're not the only one with the beginning stages or the early stages. And I would also add that you will prototype for the end of time. You will constantly be trying new programs or new initiatives or new marketing strategies or new volunteer recruitment strategies. So prototyping is just like, it's what you're going to be doing constantly. So it's really helpful to get comfortable with it and push yourself and try. Are there any last questions before we go?
No, it was awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for joining, guys. And thank you, Addie and Shafat, for leading everyone through this journey. You guys all have my email. If you're here today, you got an email from me. So if you have questions, feel free to send me an email and happy to chat more. And I can connect you with Shafat or Addie if that is of help too. Sorry,
Yeah, I think there were a
volunteered
couple
Addie and
people
Shafat.
asking for Addie's information. So if you just email Rachel, she'll make
Yeah.
it.
Send me an email and I can connect you guys. And sorry, Addie, I just volunteered you to.
That's great.
But thank you everyone for joining. If you have additional questions or want to chat, always here, excited. Thanks. And I will see you all on the next call, January 14th.
You guys.
Thank you so
Happy
much.
holidays.
Bye. Thank you.
Good luck, everybody.
New Year.
Bye,
Happy New
guys.
Year.
Yeah. Happy holidays.
Happy
You too.
holidays to you too.